back in the garden. August 14th, I think. So cool time of the year. Things are very filled out. As you can see, food plants, with a little bit of help from me, are winning the game against weeds, corn. You're starting to see cobs forming. This is surface sown corn, a little unconventional, but the plants are getting pretty big. Leaf color, right? Pretty deep green there, so I would say things are looking good. There's some cucurbitas in the mix here. Okra is coming along quite nicely, along with some wild soybean. Let me focus on that. Willow focus. Wild soybean in the mix. So that's a fun one because it just climbs up there. You can see teosinte in the distance, right next to a crop of Astronomy Domine, one of the original American land races. Kind of the beginning of the modern land race movement, if you could call it that. And there it is. Teosinte, found out, is a photo period plant. So that means that it's not gonna start flowering or making pollen until the day length gets under 12 hours. So I don't know when that is around here, but not yet. So I think we're in the clear as far as this sweet corn not getting pollinated too much by the teosinte, but I guess we'll see. I would almost like a little bit the same sort of concern over here. There's a lot of silk, right? But as to whether that's going to get any of the teosinte genetics is maybe still a question. There's lots of different corn coming up here, lots of different sizes, and some really late stuff as well. That's another thing I've been doing, is kind of just planting. There was, about a month of planting season of this corn here, just to see, what would come up, and also just because for a while it still wasn't coming up as thick as I wanted to. But I've got a nice stand here now. The density, I would say, is pretty good to allow some other stuff to come in. As you see here, tomatoes. Hopefully there's some interesting varieties of tomatoes. Got plenty of cherry tomatoes, sun gold, that kind of stuff, but would like something a little more heirloomy. So hopefully some more interesting stuff comes up. Tomatoes also, right, definitely making a run here into all these cucurbitas. This is mostly moschata, I'm assuming. Some pepo in the mix over there, candy stick type variety. And you do, after looking at, the different types, get a sense of what's what just by looking at the leaf shape, right? So I know, for example, this is mostly cucumber over here, although here we've got what might be a Maxima or moschata. Maxima versus moschata, I think, is trickier. Everything else, pepo, you definitely know it when you see it. But yeah, so cucumbers are really doing nicely. They're growing pretty freely on their own. And this is the season where things really take off on their own. Tomatoes seem to really like this kind of weather. I've started some pretty late tomatoes, but I still think I'm going to pull off, I can pull off a crop with some of these even bigger varieties. So we'll see. There's a butternut squash there. More cucumbers. Like, you see a cucumber plant, it's almost at this point like, alright, we get it. You like cucumbers. This is it was either cauliflower or broccoli, one of the two, I can't remember. But Brassica grex, so a bunch of different types of broccoli all growing together. These, I'm assuming, won't make it to seed this year, but we'll see. I'll do what I can to keep them overwintered, And then hopefully we'll get a really nice Grex of broccoli in its various forms. Really fun to do. Speaking of Grexes, here's some Chinese cabbage in the mix here. Right, planted at very much the wrong time. This is in sort of the understory of the sweet corn. I have goma sesame growing here as well, and it seems to be doing just fine. That's a traditionally pretty low fuss to no fuss one to grow, and I've been about as lazy as I can with seed saving on that, but it keeps coming back. Yeah, that is one that will grow accidentally if you just put out enough seed, and you don't need that much seed. Sesame seed's very small. That's one of those small ones that's easy to plant. I do like small seeds because you can really just kind of inundate the ground with them and get a lot of results. This is my melon Grex growing out. You can see lots of different kinds of melon. We get some fruit popping up on these. I gave it some fertilizer, some JLF the other day, so it seems to be doing fine. This is all those miscellaneous, there's some grafted stuff that was grafted onto moschata rootstock. And so I think some of those cucumbers that I grafted to moschata are really starting to take off. I'm seeing really kind of thick, vigorous cucumber leaves and stalks, so that'll be interesting. I love cucumbers. That's something I could eat all day. So there's another cucumber patch there. Did a little trellis, and it's working out quite nicely so far. Here's a closer look at the teosinte. Again, you'll see no real evidence of tasseling yet. Tasseling or silk coming out. Here's a tassel. There's some silk, right? So this is in the clear, and it's going to be fine. This will be a nice crop of sweet corn that'll come in later in the season. You know, in the next 2 or 3 weeks, it'll be done. Well in time for first frost. And yeah, we got some sesame coming in the gaps here as well. So I say that's a win. You know, even if the stand isn't as thick as I would have liked it to be, you get some sesame. So I think one way to kind of psychologically have more fun with gardening is to sort of set yourself up for some accidental wins whenever you can, right? So corn didn't come up, but hey, you got something else you can use there instead. Sesame. You can let branches from cucumbers or cucurbits come in and fill in the gaps. It's I think an easy and effective way to not so much think sort of deterministically, I need X number of corn plants, but just, you know, softly kind of tell yourself, well, you know, this is where nature intended for something else to be. And so in that sense, I think it can be really a good way to sort of refocus your mindset on how things are growing. Instead of applying the sort of, you know, human standards all the time to what you think should be happening, to just let nature do its thing and appreciate what you get. And you can get a lot more bang for the buck with that sort of mindset if you are growing genetically diverse populations. So grow lots of different versions of the same plant. Let them pollinate each other. You want to create the most sort of vigorous and genetically diverse population possible, while still maintaining, right, your standards of what you want to be growing in your garden. Here's the Korean melon Grex, right, finally filling in and taking over, right? If you see a few plants like that croaking, good riddance, get them out of there. I don't know what your problem was, but it was something. We don't need to know what your problem was. That's the elegance of a method like this. Here's some more brassicas. These are again either the cauliflower or broccoli Grex that I'm going to get going this season. Watermelon, looking a little pale. I gave it some fertilizer the other day, but it seems to need a little more. Over here, I've got soybeans and friends going on. Soybeans are about done. Kind of pathetic yield, but that's okay. Soybean at this point for me is kind of experimental, and I'm really just sort of playing with the genetics still on that one. They don't cross very freely either, so it's kind of tricky. It's, I'm kind of banging my head against the wall to get, some genetic shuffling going on here. But there's a great looking sesame plant. Sesame, I gotta say, is fun to grow. You can plant it pretty late in the season too, but it's got a nice small seed and works well. So I did pull up some stuff here to give a little more access to these small tobacco plants. I mean, these are very small by normal sort of tobacco agricultural standards, but I am going to be replanting in here. I cleared out a little space. I did do a little weeding. And yeah, I hope to get something else going on here. A head start on whatever will do well here for the fall season. Right? I'm perfectly set up for fall growing now, so happy to see that. More sesame, doing fine. You can see lots of little carrot plants coming up as well. But it's kind of strange because there was all sorts of brassicas. You can see sort of the stalks still there. And some of these may survive, although they're getting basically eaten down to their stalks, right, as you can see here. And that's fine. It's not the right season for them. That's what's going to happen. But it's what I may be gently selecting for is ones that can get eaten down during this season, but still survive and then be able to make the jump into when they actually start to thrive. And it looks like that's going to happen on some of these, so that'll be an interesting experiment as well. But it's cool because they filled out when I wanted them to, and now I have this sort of empty canvas that I can drop lots of seed onto and see what I can get next. So actually a pretty cool trick using Brassica as kind of a trap plant. Sacrifice, right? You sacrifice something to get something else. And interestingly enough, you get some pretty bare ground once your soybeans are done doing their things as well. So soybeans are starting to kind of plump up. But yeah, we'll see. Lots of little carrots starting to happen over here as well. So hell yeah. Carrots are tricky. Carrots are kind of tricky to get to germinate. And here they are, relatively weed free, right? But you see all this just burnt up, whatever this was, kale. Here's the Chinese cabbage. So I think this might pull through, and it'll be an interesting selection regardless of what happens. So I'm thankful for that. It's pretty cool to be able to observe this all the same. Kind of about your mindset, the way that you approach things. You don't have to think of things as wins or losses in the way that you do when you're sort of focused on yield or sort of a quantitative desire to pin down what the exact right method is. With this, we're not really so much focused on the method. We sort of say we don't know what the method is. The plants will find a method, but our job is to gently select and guide them in the direction of a method that we want, something that works for us in the garden. And this, I think, is actually more powerful than any sort of traditional approach to breeding. Simply because we can evoke forces that we don't fully understand, that we don't fully comprehend even. We are saying, nature, teach me what works well here. I will then save seeds from the plants that have done well. These seeds will be replanted, will intermingle with other plants that have done well in the same conditions, and the effects will be amplified. This is what we hope, and it seems to work. This seems to be something that humans have been accidentally doing for a very long time. Accidentally or perhaps purposefully, right? We know that if you look at something like the evolution or the sort of domestication of teosinte into corn, we can see that somebody along the lines seemed to be very aware of plant mutations, and that saving the seeds and replanting the seeds will tend to give you similar results as the parents. And that's pretty much all you need to know to harness what I think is one of the most powerful technologies that we have. If you believe that what we're doing here is computation, right? That we are running a computation on the operating system of nature, then the sky is really the limit. You know, we can call on intelligences far greater than the ones that we think we have pinned down with our relatively simple kind of quantitative view of nature and the world. I'm here to experiment with that. I'm here to explore Fukuoka's notion that natural farming is not principally about making food, but that it's about the perfection of human beings. And I think we could use a little bit of perfection. We could use a little bit of philosophical help in the way that we approach problems, because in case you haven't noticed, we're doing a really, really bad job of it, at least on an institutional level. It seems more and more apparent every day that the people of Earth probably need to fire their governments as soon as possible. Fire your government, okay? It's not working out. Every government on the face of the planet seems to be captured by business or by some sort of system in which the maximization of profit is the core concern of how we do business. And that's the sad truth, but it seems to be true, and business as usual is not going to cut it. So a fundamental sort of rejection of the normal way of doing business, of what money means, of what value is, of what a country is. Let me ask you this: what is a country? It only exists within the minds of human beings. A country isn't real. It's not something. It has no physical properties. It's a made-up thing that we are forced to agree upon, or agree with. And so once you get past that, I think we can then move into the realm of sort of understanding what our problems are. A big jump that people need to make is understanding that humans are subject to a systematic distortion of reality through our senses. And this, if you think about it, is actually kind of obvious, right? There's, yeah, I mean, the way that we perceive the world is a trick is easier evolutionarily. A trick is easier to justify than the real thing, right? In terms of our cognition. And most of the ways that we sort of perceive things are based on little tricks or hacks. And I can get into that a little bit more later if you'd like to know more about what cognitive science has found out about perception, visual, oral perception. But if you look at art and you look at music, there seem to be hints about the way that we perceive the world. And especially if you look at language, I am a firm believer in the idea that the nature of language is pretty much the closest thing we have to understanding the nature of human cognition. And that if you look at human languages through the study of linguistics, what we find is that there are, in the same way that there are sort of a limited number of ways that a plant can exist, right? There's a limited number of plants and animals, and what we can, sort of imagine an animal or plant looking like on Earth, right? A DNA-based organism. Although it's vast, right, and really widely vast. On a certain level, when you've seen a lot of life on Earth, there are certain patterns that emerge. And the same is true of language. Once you've seen, a couple hundred of them in its vast diversity, and language diversity is great and it's important. I can talk more about that later. But once you've seen a lot of them, there's a lot of things that become apparent, certain trends. One of which is that in any language there's only going to be a finite number of sounds that you use, right? And these sounds don't correspond to any particular meaning, right? There's nothing about the word squash that tells us anything about a squash. Or it doesn't even tell us, right, if we're talking about a game or a food or the verb to squash, okay? And so there's arbitrariness at not just the level of sounds that are allowed to exist in the language, but also in the words, right? So words are arbitrary, and there's a finite number of those as well, right? So we then use those finite elements to construct an infinite number of sentences. And that's where things get interesting, is that even a small child will make up sequences of words that have never been said before in the language. And so we see a creativity here that suggests that, right, this is an important part of what we are doing on Earth, is exhibiting some kind of creativity that is not able to be determined by an automaton or any sort of procedural or deterministic model. And so as creative beings, we are happiest and most content when we are being creative in nature. And so I see what I'm doing here as a practice in being creative in nature, right? I consider this in many ways to be more kind of an art than it is a technical practice. And that once you let go of a lot of these sort of suffocating ideas that are tied to capitalism and science, not that there's anything really wrong with science, but I would encourage you to consider, when you learn science, how that affects your relationship with nature. Again, as a preemptive assumption, we want to just say that nature is at its core, always going to be too complex. It's going to be more complex than we are able to figure out. And while we've made, really big strides in understanding the nature of nature, it sounds funny to say that, but right, the nature of something. This is just the beginning, right? We are just as big of dumbasses as we were 50 years ago, and 50 years from now, we will still be dumbasses when it comes to what we think we actually understand about nature. And that should be sort of a starting premise to the way that you approach this problem. Because if you don't, it's just no fun. And so this should be fun. This should be a place where you experiment, where things work out, things don't, where you get to see the drama of nature kind of playing out in front of your eyes, and that you should be having all kinds of victories that you can celebrate along the way as you're implementing these practices. It's fun, it's good to be out in nature, it's good to be communing with the soil. Soil is a very special place. This is, the boundary between heaven and earth, and there is an infinite amount of complexity and diversity underneath our feet. There's a universe underneath our feet as well as above our heads, and it is equally as complex and fascinating below as it is above. And these two might be the same things. We just really can't know. And not being able to know, it's also, I think kind of a liberating feeling in a certain way. You don't have to know. We can enter into new contracts with nature. And I think that's what's going to happen. We're going to be forced into this at some point, whether we like it or not. A new way of living within nature, where hopefully we understand and can green the planet, add more and more green to the planet in a way that has never been seen before, right? That we can consciously do this. We can do this in a friendly way. We can do this in a way that beautifies the planet. But that growing trees is a way to bring rain, right? Trees bring rain, not the other way around. It's not that rain is just there and then trees profit upon that. Trees bring up groundwater that wouldn't otherwise be reaching the surface. And then, right, trees have massive surface area with their leaves, right, and are sucking water out, right, through capillary action. We can accept these sorts of things, and we can seek to perfect humanity. This sort of living with nature can hopefully teach us in a gentle way how we should be living, and that the answers are found simply within nature, right? That the answers are there for the asking, and that if we formulate the right questions, nature will answer for us. I do believe that we're tapping into a system of computation which is much more intelligent and much more elegant and beautiful than anything any human has ever created, and that this is the way forward. We should be working less. We should be enjoying life more. We should be living closer to nature. This is psychologically the right way to be.